Hello, how are you? Thank you. I'm Ken Egan, Executive Director of Humanities Montana, and this is it. This is the ultimate event at the 10th Annual Montana Festival of the Book. Thank you. You know, the literary theorist Mikhail Bakhtin taught us that carnivals are magic because carnivals overturn that which is taken for granted, they overturn hierarchies, they cause us to rethink what we believe, they destabilize. I would suggest to you that the Montana Festival of the Book is precisely a carnival in that sense. Why? Because this is an event that celebrates that which is often overlooked, even denigrated. What is that? That's writing, reading, ruminating. I hope you've all had the experience over the last 4 days of having moments where suddenly your world was displaced, suddenly you were surprised, suddenly your assumptions were called into question. That's what we're about. So what I love about the Festival of the Book is it truly embodies our primary commitment to learning and reflecting together. So here's a final charge to you before we bring on the first wonderful writer. My charge to you is, why don't we try to create a permanent carnival of culture where we are constantly reading, writing, reflecting together? Thank you very much. Now let me welcome Lisa Teberg, who will introduce our first writer.
Good evening. Author of 3 novels and 3 story collections, Kevin Canty enthralls his readers by examining human relationships and facing the painful and unforgiving aspects of life. His debut collection of stories, A Stranger in This World, received high acclaim and was named a notable book by the New York Times Book Review. This collection comprises a series of murmurs, confessions, and accounts of men and women doing the wrong things for the wrong reasons. In his 2001 novel, 9 Below Zero, love and despair are set in a sorrowful, desperation-laden Western landscape. The New York Times hailed it as smart, gritty, unsentimental, and finely tuned to the precariousness and treachery of human need. In his most recent collection of short stories, Where the Money Went, Mr. Canty crafts a luminous collection bursting with emotional intensity, evoking at its core the very human need to make sense of a nonsensical world. In the 9 tales of ruined or decaying relationships, Mr. Canty exposes the fractures in ordinary marriages, expertly examines betrayal and the array of directions life can take once relationships end. Many of the stories in this collection are based here in Montana. Ann Beatty once stated, "Canty creates a landscape all of his own." Yet it's undeniable that his work speaks to us here in the West. He is a truly authentic voice in the Western American tradition of writing. Please welcome Kevin Canty. Kevin Canty.
Thanks to Lisa. Thanks to everybody from the Book Festival. It's a wonderful experience. And thanks to you all for coming out on a Grizz weekend night. This is the 4th time I've read in Missoula this year, and I have read everything that's short enough to read from my new collection, except the contents page, and possibly the copyrights. So I'm going to read a story from a collection, one before this, Honeymoon. This is a story called Red Dress. But this should not be taken as less than a ringing endorsement of my new collection, which I like a lot. So, Red Dress. I wanted to be a mixologist. I don't know where I got the desire or even the word, which still has a kind of magic for me, mixologist. In the syllables of those letters are my parents' parties, nights of smoke and laughter and lipstick. I borrowed the Mr. Boston bartender's guide from the liquor cabinet and read it in my bed, imagining myself pouring, shaking, stirring, holding the sugar cube in a slotted spoon, and drizzling the red liquor through. I learned the difference between lemon zest and lemon peel. I memorized the steps for a perfect Ramos gin fizz. I knew how to pour a Manhattan, a Stinger, a Grasshopper, a White Russian. My sister was gone to college by then, and our only television was downstairs. On party nights, I could neither sleep nor read. I lay on my bed with the light on and listened to the undifferentiated oceanic hubbub below, louder as the night went on, the whole house gradually filling with cigarette smoke. Occasionally a guest, a man trying to find the upstairs bathroom, would come through the door of my room and find me on the bed, awake, which seemed to come not only as a surprise, but as an embarrassment to him, as if he'd caught me in some shameful act. He'd shut the light off on the way out. Other nights, I would sit in the dark at the top of the stairs and listen. I would try to imagine myself among the guests, try to imagine what they were talking about. I could hear my mother's high-pitched, brittle laughter, imagine her mixing and drifting from guest to guest in her red party dress. I didn't want to be one of them. I just wanted to know what made them so loud and excited, what they were hoping for. I promoted myself to doorman at some point. My job was to answer the bell, greet our guests, take their coats, and point them toward the bar. It's always winter the way I remember it. I think now that it might have just been 1 year, one winter giving way to spring and summer, but I remember it as always, world without end. This job as doorman was unsatisfying. I was closer to the action, but I was visible. I was always being called by the doorbell, just as the conversation was becoming interesting, just as they were starting to forget I was among them. Or coming back after the punchline, the joke I was too young to hear, the women still giggling. They couldn't help themselves. Or else, as I drifted or sidled to the edge of the group, I'd be noticed, I'd be called attention to with a greeting or a wave of the cigarette, and the talk would instantly turn toward the innocuous, the lives of pets, movies that had been seen, West Side Story, or Dr. Zhivago. My parents' life and the lives of their friends seemed even more jumbled and fragmentary than they had before. My mother, for instance. In everyday life, she was vague, sometimes absent-minded, wandering the house while my father was at work like she was half asleep. In my dreams, I see her standing in an almost dowdy, unrevealing floral dress, an I Love Lucy dress, standing just inside the doorway of her bedroom, pausing with one hand on the dresser and trying to remember, you could see it in her face, what she'd wanted from there. Was it laundry? Jewelry? Was she going out or staying in? I still don't know what she was actually thinking about or dreaming about. When she put on her red dress and her lipstick and descended into a party, though, she became an altogether different person, energetic, intense, almost uncomfortably alive. She was everywhere at once, laughing at jokes, holding her white cigarettes to be lit, carrying trays of olives and crackers and little squares of cheese on toothpicks. When someone spoke, especially if they were talking lightly or playfully, she was lit with concentration, her mouth moving into a half smile or a half frown as each new sentence came spilling out. Her attention was as urgent and narrow as a flashlight beam. Yours was the one face in the world, the one joke, the only scandalous story or amusing anecdote. She lit her subjects one by one and then moved on and on. Never to me. The one place her attention never lit was on my face. And if sometime after 11 she happened to notice that I was still awake, watching her as ever from my station by the door, all the old puzzlement would return to her face and she'd stare at me, wondering who I was and how I'd gotten there for a long moment before ordering me off to bed. In her red party dress, she would tuck me into the sheets and she would kiss me goodnight and then leave down the hall in a rustle of fabric. I would lie on my bed with the door open, drifting in and out of sleep, awakening to singing, to arguments and fights, sleeping again to dream of flowers and smoke, the laughter penetrating the thin screen of my sleep. Once I came to the top of the stairs, awake or nearly awake, in time to watch two men carry another out into the snow, a trickle of blood at the corner of his mouth. Once I heard someone singing Anecdotes, which I recognized from an old cartoon, and always the sound of my mother's laughter. In the morning, before my parents woke up, which was never before 10:30 or 11, the house was mine. The ashtray smell of dead cigarettes, lip-sticky glasses, the toothpicks with their frilly cellophane tops scattered at random on the tablecloth. Only the flowers, Flowers that my mother and I had picked out so carefully the day before had managed to stay fresh. I would wander barefoot through the wreckage, sniffing the half-finished drinks, the bourbon smell of my father in each of them, and having little conversations. I was winning. I was charming. I left laughter behind me wherever I went. Sometime in spring, I was promoted to bartender, not without an argument, though. My mother roused herself into one of her fits of motherhood, which were always a little imaginary, hypothetical. She was acting as if she were my mother, as if I were her son. "I don't think he needs to stay up that late," she said. This was the eve of another party. I can't understand how they could have had so many parties. It must have been 2 or 3 or 4 years altogether, not just one. My father, with my help, was setting up the drinks table, watching me carefully prepare the bowl of lime wedges, arrange the ice and shakers and Angostura bitters. "He likes it," my father said. "Besides, he's always up till the wee small hours anyway." "I always send him to bed." "Doesn't mean he goes to sleep," my father said, turning his attention on me. "What do you do up there anyway, champ? You aren't sleeping, are you?" I didn't know how to respond to this. I didn't know what this was code for or what the secret response might be. "I could never stand to be left out myself," he said. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" my mother said. They disappeared into the kitchen, leaving me to bustle, straighten, and cut, laying out ashtrays, putting the glasses in an accurate row, wine glasses, cocktail glasses, highballs. If I could make myself indispensable, they would have to let me stay. The pleasure that I found in this kind of work, tidying, straightening, fussing, was intense, illicit. I straightened the flowers in their vases until they looked attractive from every angle. I placed ashtrays, coasters, bowls of pretzels, and mixed nuts, while my parents were arguing in the kitchen. My father would win eventually, as he did. He would wear her down like water. I took uneasy pleasure in knowing that he would prevail, knowing that I was fooling him. He thought I was pretending to be the little man. Her face, when they came out of the kitchen, had a mixed, unsettled, lost look that made me feel lost with her. She was right, and it didn't matter. "You're on, champ," said my father. "Let's see if we can find you a necktie." "Just until 10:30, though," my mother said. 10:30 or 11, said my father. "We'll see how it goes." She looked at him helplessly. He shouldn't have contradicted her in front of me, but she could do nothing about it. And then she looked at me, and it was strange. It felt like she could really see me, like the fog had cleared away momentarily, and she recognized something, realized something. "You be careful," she said to me. "What does that mean?" my father asked her. "He's in his own living room, for Christ's sake. What could go wrong?" She didn't answer for a moment. Abstract, musing, she stared into my eyes, wondering what she saw there. I didn't know myself. I knew it was guilty. I knew it was something to hide, but I didn't know what its name was. "He could cut himself," she said, turning away from my face, back to father. "That's all I meant." "He's not going to cut himself," said my father. Though I did, in fact, slice my finger wide open with a paring knife while cutting up a second batch of limes at almost midnight. 60 or 70 men and women milled and perched and chatted on the first floor of the old house that night. A few of the men, hardy souls in wool sport jackets, out on the patio smoking cigarettes. A group around the stereo listening. I remember distinctly listening to Olatunji and his drums of passion. The night had gone quickly up till then. It amused them all to treat me as a genuine bartender, to make jokes about stiff ones and wet ones that I didn't quite understand, though I laughed eagerly, and to stuff dollar bills and loose silver into the jar that my father had insisted I put on the table in front of me. I had the glassware and the bottles and the mixers and the utensils all neatly aligned, near at hand. I wore a dish towel around my waist as a sort of apron to tidy up any spills. And I thought that I had fulfilled my duties as well as any grown-up bartender could, that I had been crisp and professional and nearly invisible, and I was proud of myself. All this changed in the course of 1 second. I was cutting a lime, and something, a shout, a burst of laughter, distracted my attention. When I looked down again, I saw that I'd cut myself, and cut myself badly. That moment before the blood begins to flow, before anything starts to hurt, when the cut flap of skin turns white. I was immediately filled with shame. Quickly, before any of them could see me, I wrapped the cut finger in 3 or 4 thicknesses of cocktail napkin and slipped away from my post, through the kitchen, and up the back stairs to the third, hard-to-find bathroom in the old part of the house. I sat on the edge of the toilet and gingerly unwrapped the napkins, Blood seeped eagerly from the cut. In the bright, pale green fluorescent light, the hand looked disembodied, already dead. I thought that if I lifted up the flap of skin, I might see all the way to the bone, but I was already a little dizzy, a little queasy, so I didn't. What if I died there? What if I bled to death while the party raged downstairs? But I wasn't going to die. I was going to get caught. I had overstepped myself, had pretended to be what I was not, competent, reliable, safe. In fact, I was just a child pretending. I cut the light so that nobody would find me and waited for the bleeding to subside. Clear moonlight came through the window, through the leafless trees outside. Stupid boy, I thought, stupid boy. Soon I'd have to face them, and they would all know. The bleeding continued, slower and slower. I soaked the blood up with toilet paper. It hurt by then considerably, and I had to bend and unbend my fingers several times to convince myself that I had not severed something vital. After a few minutes, the blood slowed to a manageable trickle. In the moonlight, my eyes had adjusted perfectly well. I found gauze and adhesive tape in the medicine cabinet over the sink. Clumsy, single-handed, I wrapped the wound in bandages, finishing off with a pair of flesh-colored Band-Aids, in the hope that I would not be discovered, in the hope that I could return to my post behind the bar. I hid the bloody paper under a magazine artfully placed over the top of the trash basket, slipped the lock, and went out into the hallway. There, in the moonlight, was my mother with a man, Ken Dellen, my father's college friend. They weren't touching, but something about their bodies alerted me, awkward, like frozen bodies in a game of freeze tag. Something had been started, interrupted. They must have been kissing. That blank, unseeing look on her face that only slowly cleared, the flush on her neck. But I didn't know that then. I was an unwelcome surprise. Apart from that, nothing was clear. "Ray," she said, "what are you doing up here?" I held my injured hand behind my back as casually as I could. "Nothing," I said. And then when I realized this didn't make any sense, I said, "The other bathrooms were all full." "It's late, sweetie," she said, stepping away from Ken Dellen, who wouldn't give me his face. She's bent toward me, and I smelled her perfume. "It's late. Off we go. Let's go." She took my hand, the innocent hand, and led me down the back hallway to my bedroom. The ebb and surge of conversation spilled up the stairs, but it was not for me, not that night. She led me to my door and kissed me briefly, dryly on the top of my head, as she had for most of my life, an assertion of normalcy, a statement that everything was, after all, in the right place, where it had been before. She was wearing the red dress, same as always. Then she turned and closed the door and went back to wherever she was going, leaving me again alone in my room. And maybe she was right. Maybe I was overtired. Maybe it was not right for me to be up so late. Because when I caught sight of myself in the mirror, my crisp white shirt and real bow tie that my father had tied for me, it struck me as awful and wrong and unfair, and I didn't even have a name for it. I curled into a ball on my bed and cried until I fell asleep in my clothes. The finger became infected in the following days. I concealed it from my mother as long as I could. As the swelling grew and the pain drummed along with every beat of my heart, I didn't know exactly where I stood with her. I didn't want any new event between us until the old one had subsided. Ken Dellen and my mother and Ken Dellen, like something out of a dream. And in fact, I did see the moment replayed in dreams with photographic literalness. And I nearly managed to convince myself that it had never happened, if anything had happened at all. By midweek, though, I had to do something. I couldn't sleep, and strange colors were appearing around the swollen cut. Awake, asleep, I felt like I was half body and half finger, every part of me focused on this one throbbing spot. I confessed, I was examined, taken to the doctor, pronounced purulent. The cut was drained and cleaned and freshly bandaged. I was put on antibiotics in order to stay home for the rest of the week. I may have been seriously ill. I felt a kind of pleasant haze or fog in the edges of my vision, and the doctor and my mother were worried. It was in their faces. The gifted child does not miss that kind of thing. Home then, and a short week of television watching, soup and crackers, the sound of the washing machine, hot breath of the dryer. I was special once again. This should have been perfect. Home alone, my mother and I, the chance to see the daily life she led, the life that was hidden while I was at school. I don't think I was sick any more than the next child, but I did enjoy being sick more than most of them. But that week was different. In the afterimage of the party, the dream of Mr. Kendallen, the interrupted moment, I felt like I was always on the verge of a question. I had to hold it back, a box I knew I didn't want to open. And my mother, when she saw me at all, always seemed about to launch into some new explanation. We were not easy with each other. So I slept, and I read, and I slept some more, and I waited for the weekend, and after the weekend I would be back at school. On Friday, though, I woke from my nap midway through the afternoon and my mother was gone. Shopping, I thought, dry cleaning, general errands. Nothing was planned for the weekends, no flowers or special foods, no trips to the liquor store and $100 bills. My sister was coming home that evening. All of the pieces of my world were in place. I went to my parents' bedroom overlooking the street, and I looked out on the place where her car had been, the outline of her car in dry pavement on the rain-darkened street. It was 3 or 3:30, overcast and dark. The light in the room was dim and gray, soft shadowed, a delicate touch on skin. I went to my mother's closet, and I opened the folding doors, and I touched the red dress. I was alone in the house. There was nobody to stop me, nobody to see. The barriers between my dream life and my waking one had been let down. My own clothes felt like a mistaken costume. Quickly I took them off and threw them under the bed where I wouldn't have to look at them. Now I was alone with the mass of dresses, the colors spilling out into the dim light, the disorderly crowd of shoes on the floor. Dresses and dresses, but there was only one for me. I was almost exactly my mother's size. My skin was soft as hers was, softer. I could feel the softness of my own skin. I slipped the dress on, the red dress. I looked at the lipsticks, the bottles of perfume. I looked at my shoulders in the mirror. A strange face stared back at me, a girl's face, mine. A car door slammed shut outside. I ran to the window, stupid boy, and that was where she saw me. Maybe nothing more than a flash of red, but she saw me. In the moment, she would be in the house and upstairs, and what would happen after that? I couldn't imagine. I took my clothes and ran to my room, closing the door behind me as the front door opened and closed downstairs, but it was no use. There was no time. She was bound to find me. She had already found me. I sat on the edge of my bed and waited. She didn't come. A minute passed, another minute. As quietly as I could, I slipped out of the dress, into my boy's clothes, watched over by models and dinosaurs. I opened my door as gently as I could and put the dress back in the closet. When the door was closed, everything was where it had started. I went back to my room and waited, but she wasn't coming up. After 10 or 15 minutes, I went downstairs. She was waiting in the kitchen. "How are you feeling, sweetie?" she asked, putting the cereal box in the pantry, the milk in the refrigerator door. She didn't even look. "I'm fine," I told her. "Glad to hear it," she said, and that was all. She looked at me once, and I knew that she had seen me if ever I had doubted it, but we never spoke about it, never spoke about that afternoon or Kendallen, never spoke openly to each other again. She was still my mother, I was still her son. But everything after that was in code, ambiguous, the silences full of unasked questions, the words empty of answers. And now I'm grown, and my mother is dead, and my father is dead, and this is all the childhood I will ever have.
Thank you, Kevin. In 10 published books of fiction, Marianne Wiggins has pushed the boundaries of storytelling, taking risks with shifting points of view, surprising settings, overlapping narratives, and an intoxicating fusion of fiction and nonfiction. Though she has lived abroad much of her adult life, she has said that she is driven by wanting to write about how we came to be Americans. Wiggins first began publishing in the 1970s and received wide recognition for the 1989 novel John Dollar, which she has described as a female version of Lord of the Flies. It is also a meditation on the costs of Western imperialism. Her 2004 novel, Evidence of Things Unseen, was a finalist for both the National Book Award and the Pulitzer Prize. Set in the years shortly after World War I, the novel explores the allure and terror of modern science through the development of the atom bomb. She's an ambitious writer. Her most recent novel, The Shadow Catcher, traces two overlapping stories, those of a fictional surrogate named Marianne Wiggins and the noted photographer of American Indians, Edward Curtis. Full disclosure, Kim Anderson and I read Shadow Catcher sometime in August and said, we've got to get Marianne Wiggins to Missoula. That's literally what happened, so I'm glad we did. The novel meditates in exquisite prose on mortality, the search for family, the desire to fix our shape-shifting selves, the need for connection, the illusion of art. It's also a brilliant account of changes in the American West from the 19th century to our own day. It's a novel that forces the reader to reflect deeply on what U.S. culture has made of this extraordinary and now changed place. In that sense, Marianne Wiggins is truly a Western American writer. Please welcome Marianne Wiggins. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me tell you about a sketch by Leonardo I saw one afternoon in the Queen's Gallery in London a decade ago, and why I think it haunts me. The Queen's Gallery is on the west front side of Buckingham Palace, on a street that's always noisy, full of taxis rushing round the incongruous impediment of a massive residence in the middle of the route to Parliament and Westminster Abbey, and, more importantly, a train station named Victoria. The Queen's Gallery is small, neither well maintained nor adequately lit, and when I went there to see the royal collection of Da Vinci drawings, the day was pissing rain and cold and damp, and the room smelled of wet wool seasoned in the lingering aroma of fry-up and vinegar, an atmosphere far removed from the immediacy, muscularity, and sunny beauty of Da Vinci's subjects. There were drawings of male adolescents, drawings of chubby infants, drawings of rampant horses, toothless women, old men with spiky white hairs on their noses and boils on their chins. And then, in a corner, there was a different kind of sketch, a map. It was drawn in ochre on a sheet of rough, uneven rag, approximately the size of ordinary letter paper, the same color as Southern California sandstone. I stood in front of it for something like too long because a guard stepped forward till I leaned away, still looking at it, mesmerized. Some things you can remember for a lifetime. Other things mysteriously bleed away or fade to shadow. Sometimes you try to bring the memory of something back and can't. You try to see a face, recapture love, recapture rapture, but it's gone, that face, that vibrancy. Other images return without your bidding. Almost every night when I'm at home, alone in bed, before I fall asleep, my mind presents that sketch of Leonardo's without warning. Onto that inner space where dreams take place, my mind projects its image. I see it, plain as day. A little piece of sandstone-colored paper on which an Italian coastal town is drawn from a perspective high above the ground, so high that no treetop, no cliff, no man-made promontory could have served as Leonardo's point of view. It's the view an airplane affords, a view Da Vinci must have drawn from an imaginary self-projection, and judging from the scale of things, he must have been imagining himself 10,000 feet above the ground, or almost 2 miles up. Commercial airline pilots volunteer this kind of information, altitude and cruising speed, which is how I've learned to estimate how high above the ground I am looking from an airplane window. I've learned what the Earth looks like from a great height. But how did Leonardo know? Are we hardwired as a species to imagine flying? We take it for granted now, most of us, this point of view as a second sight, because many of us have flown. Many of us have been up there, and even if we haven't, most of us have seen the pictures of our world as a distant object, beamed to Earth by satellite. We can adopt this point of view as a modern way of looking, but is it modern? What if there's something in our psyches designed to see things from above? Isn't it a possibility that, as humans, we were built to dream from heights? That Columbus dreamed of flying to America, dreamed his future landfall from above? That Lewis and Clark, bedding down on the rocky ground, flew at night across the Cascade Mountains in their dreams, above sequoias, over the Columbia, toward the valiant coast to the magnificent Pacific? Maybe we are built to reconnoiter from above, survey the earth from heaven, dream of flying. Maybe it's the angel in us. Gertrude Stein, the first time she flew, saw the earth's crevices and folds as the antecedents of Cubism and told Picasso that he'd stolen that artistic vision off the backs of birds. I want to think that Galileo flew in thought. I want to think that all the peasants in the fields of history dreamed in flight, that all the slaves and all indentured souls whose dust still gathers on this earth had wings at night and aspirations swift enough for uplift. I want to believe we're built for soaring in our thoughts, and out here on the edge in California at night, in that fading wakefulness before sleep erases sight, my mind projects that sketch of Leonardo's, and then, before I realize it, I'm flying in, flying to America, making landfall on this continent, not from over the Pacific, not from Singapore or Australia, Fiji or Hawaii, on routes I've flown in real airplanes. But I dream I'm coming in across the other ocean, over the Atlantic like Columbus. Flying in, not as I've done from England and Europe in a jumbo jet with Greenland off the starboard side, down the Scotia coast with Halifax below, but flying in and making my first contact off the Carolina coast near the 37th meridian, where the English landed equidistant from the Catholic French in Canada and the Spanish Jesuits in Florida. I dream I'm flying in across Cape Hatteras, where that little spit of land cricks around Pamlico Sound, where the Tuscarora were, where the Tuscarora fished and lived and danced and laughed and loved before the measles and the smallpox took them. Here in California on the edge at night, after the coyotes end their braying, there's an hour after midnight when a silence drops into these canyons, which persists till the first birdsong of morning, and in that intervening lull, I give myself to flying in, west from the Tuscarora marshland over Choctaw Sands and Chickasaw Meadows. I project myself speeding toward myself, flying as the eagle flies over Creek, Catawba, Natchez, Kiowa, Comanche and Plains Apache, Wichita and Zuni, Navajo and Hopi, above the first and second mesas over Acoma and Chaco Canyon, across the Colorado toward the Paiute, Chumash, and Morongo, here where I am in Los Angeles. There are those who say the sound my country makes at night, the sound I hear when flying, the sound my nation exhales as it sleeps, is the sound of prayer, the sound of Jesus Christ arising from the basalt in the Rockies, splitting hearts of granite as he shakes off chains of time and is reborn. And there are those who claim the sound my nation makes at night is the metallic hiss of money in the forge, or the sound of slavery's jism misspent in anger and assimilation, or that the sound my nation makes is the sizzle of cosmetic simulation, the sound the cutting edge of surgical removal makes, the sound of history slipping into coma, cosmic silence, almost total, through which, in my dream of flying, I perceive a hopeful distant note, the sound my country makes. A note so confirming and annunciatory that it seems to bend into itself, bend into its own impending future, like an announcing angel coming round the mountain, bend the way a shadow bends, conforming to the curvature of earth, wailing gently through the night. That sound is the siren sound of the Iron Road, a haunting whistle. I fly in my imagination over the abandoned plains, the Rockies, and the ghost Mojave, toward myself, toward home, and turning in my bed, I hear it. Out here on the edge in California, turning in my bed, the nation at my back, I hear a single note heralding arrival, the sound of a train whistle, the sound my country makes, and I feel safe. That's the beginning of those are the first 4 pages of The Shadowcatcher. And I recorded an interview this afternoon with Montana Public Radio. The interviewer is Sherry Newman. I hope she's known to you. And when I sat down for the interview, she said, "What is that? What are those first 4 pages?" The plot, actually, in her mind, starts on the next page, where a narrator sort of takes up the narration that's going to happen. And she said, "What is that? What is that first 5 pages?" And I said, "Well, that's a writer's conceit. And I will explain to you the conceit involved in that. First of all, it's an easy read for me because I can stand up in front of an audience and read that and then go home for the rest of the night and people think they know what the book is about. And actually, you do know what the book is about because what starts to happen is you hear a first-person voice. Whether you realize it or not, I mean, I start the whole damn book, let me tell you. So you kind of know that you're not going to get an omniscient narrator all the way through. Let me tell you about that sketch by Leonardo I saw one afternoon. So I'm introducing you to one of the characters, the first-person voice, who develops not only as the narrator, but a person called Marianne Wiggins, who lives a sort of fictive life through half of this novel. The other conceit that this exercises is something that I fell into with my previous novel, Evidence of Things Unseen. I had written this nice little 1-page intro, which if you're standing in Barnes & Noble and you think, I've never heard of Marianne Wiggins, let me just see what this novel is about, and you open it to that first page, you get a sort of précis of what the whole book is going to be about. So in this bit that I just read to you, which has no title, you just open the book and it starts off that way. The conceit of mine was to tell you everything that you can expect to find in this succeeding 318 pages. And one of them is going to be that first voice. You don't know whether it's male or female, but it's first person. You might presume that, since it says Marianne Wiggins on the front, that first-person voice is probably female. The other thing that you know is that the canvas is going to be kind of between 2 oceans. It's a canvas that's a national canvas, and that you're going to get into something kind of large and talking about who we are as a country. The other conceit, of course, is that who the hell are all these Indians? How did the Indians get there? And that goes to the heart of the real hero of the book, who is Edward S. Curtis, a man from history. And the story of the shadow catcher is really two braids intertwined through the length of the novel. One, a narrative that is contemporary, and the other, an historical narrative of Edward's life. And the woman who was really important to my conception of this book, which is the woman he married called Clara. So you get the Indians, you get the nation, you get the first-person voice, and you get the trains. Let me tell you a little bit about Curtis in case he's unknown to you. If you have seen a picture of an American Indian tribe, it is most likely that that picture, that photograph, was taken by Edward S. Curtis. He set out in the middle of his life on the venture to photograph every tribe west of the Mississippi. This is at the beginning of the 20th century, under the presidential reign of Teddy Roosevelt. And Curtis was just astonishing luck. He was just really lucky. He was gorgeous to look at, first of all. If you want to know why I wrote the book, it was just like, wow, I'd like to spend 5 years with this guy. Just fabulous looking, kind of a Brad Pitt, remember Legends of the Fall? That Brad Pitt. But he was a photographer, self-taught, autodidactic, in Seattle, and a mountaineer. He would, for recreation, just run up Mount Rainier. And he got lucky up there, was caught in a storm, and heard the voices of some men calling out for help. And that happened to be Bird Grinnell, who was then, you know who Bird Grinnell is, Mr. Forestry. And Curtis saved Grinnell's group of men, brought them back down to Seattle, showed that group of men, which also included Merriman, his photographs, and they sort of fell in love with Curtis, and Curtis fell in love with them. And before we knew it, a year and a half later, Curtis is introduced to Theodore Roosevelt and becomes the Roosevelt's family private photographer. He was the Annie Leibovitz of his day. I mean, he was Seattle's society photographer, and oh God, could he take beautiful pictures. I mean, he understood the whole depth of field. He just took magnificent looking pictures. Curtis, through Roosevelt, got to, started to say, look, I have this dream that I want to photograph the American native tribes before they vanish. Now, let's move ourselves back to the beginning of the 20th century. And if you've been to New York and you've been to that seminal institution of Roosevelt's, which is the American Natural History Museum, and you walk in, you see these dioramas of the woolly mammoth and the saber-toothed tiger and the American Indian. It was presumed that these were degrees of extinction. It was presumed that the American Indian was not going to survive beyond the 20th century, all of its tribes. And so Curtis, which I thought was heroic on his part, said to Roosevelt, I want to take this project on. I want to go in and take photographs of every American tribe before they die. And in order to do that, I need money. So Roosevelt suggested that Curtis apply to the Smithsonian. The Smithsonian kind of took a look at Curtis's CV and said, who the hell is this guy? He's a society photographer out of Seattle. We don't know him. And this is around the time of Franz Boas, when American ethnology was just beginning to, get its muscle. And so Curtis, he got nowhere with the Smithsonian. And Roosevelt wrote a letter of introduction to J.P. Morgan. And Curtis insinuated himself into Morgan's presence and said, will you loan me the money? And J.P. Morgan said, well, how much money do you need, Mr. Curtis? And Mr. Curtis said, $1.2 million in today's money. And Morgan said, the Bible was less expensive, Mr. Curtis. But Curtis took the deal, and so did Morgan took the deal. Morgan took the deal because, you know who J.P. Morgan was. He was the Union Pacific. And guess what? If photographs made in the West could make the West look more attractive, that meant more train business. So Curtis made a financial union with Morgan. What do we know about the trains? When the trains were built, they went out, they came out here. Guess what they killed? The buffalo. When the buffalo went, guess what happened to the American Indians? So you see there's a Faustian agreement that Curtis made with Morgan. So in that beginning part that I read, you get the sound of the train. So you get a whole kind of foreshadowing of where the novel is going to take you. And that what leads to Curtis's ultimate tragedy is making that deal with Morgan, because what happened was Curtis just spent the money. Yes, it was very difficult. I mean, you come out here, can you imagine a wagon with glass plates making these photographs in this terrain? It just wasn't easy, but Curtis had to have Moroccan leather notebooks, and he had to have his hand-sewn doeskin jacket from Abercrombie and Fitch, and he was profligate with Morgan's money. Ultimately, at the end, Morgan died. Curtis still hadn't produced the volumes that he thought he could do in 7 years. It took him 30 years to do it. And Morgan's heirs forced Curtis to sign over all the copyrights of the photographs. I've seen that document. It's in the Smithsonian, and it's as if Christ's own tears were on this. It's one of the saddest documents I've ever seen. Curtis signed over the copyrights, which is why when you see those advertisements for Curtis lithographs, the copyrights aren't in, Curtis doesn't own them. It's somebody's making a lot of money off of this, and it's not the Curtis family. It's not Curtis himself, and it's not any of his heirs. So there was enough material there where this was inviting a novel. This is just such a great story to be told. I couldn't resist it. The last conceit from the bit that I read you, and let me refresh the first sentence. Let me tell you about a sketch by Leonardo I saw one afternoon in the Queen's Gallery. The last conceit, and this is a major writer's tip, get Da Vinci in the first sentence. Dan Brown, man. Get Da Vinci in there. Get those, people are going to be standing in that bookstore saying, oh, I wonder what this is about. Da Vinci right up front. The man sold 2 million books the second day of this new novel. How is that possible? Even Sedaris even Sedaris has got to be saying, how is that possible? First of all, where were the books before? Where is the warehouse? It was like a secret conspiratorial book depository somewhere in Nevada that's holding Dan Brown's books. And of course, I have read him. I have read him so I could try to plagiarize him and pick up tips. And part of the joy of the last 3 days is that there have been a lot of writers in the audience wanting to know, how does it happen? How does it come together? How do you do this? So I thought I would talk about writers' tips and pass a few tips on to you, the first being get Da Vinci in the first sentence. I've learned a lot from other writers, and I'll tell you an anecdote, another literary festival that I was at in Toronto. Toronto is a great town for literary festivals, but it favors the British authors because of Canada's distribution deals with England as opposed to America. America just publishes books and throws them over the border, much to the chagrin of the Canadians. So the Canadians preferred an export-import British deals. And so I was invited, because everybody's confused, because I spent 16 years in England, they don't know where I'm from, and anyway, I was invited, not as an American, but because they thought I was a Brit. And Antonia Byatt was appearing that night. And at that festival, writers read every night, and the other writers who are invited for the week are expected to come and fill some of the seats in the audience. And the deal is, the stage is much larger than this, but the deal is very similar to what is happening tonight. The writers, are sitting down in the front, and when you are called, you come up the front. But unlike passing through the magic curtain and appearing miraculously from, the back of the stage, the writers are required to come up the steps on the proscenium and walk toward the podium. And the idea, of course, is to get to the podium before the applause stops, which means you're kind of, jogging up to the podium. And Antonia Byatt, who writes under the name of A.S. Byatt, who knows why, was speaking that night, and she had just been nominated back in the UK for Possession. Possession had just been nominated for the Booker Prize. So she was all flustery, because she had come to Toronto from London, and she had to fly back out that night, and she was, full of fluster. And so I was sitting in the audience, and Antonia is called, and she's going to read from Possession. And she's down in the front row, and she comes up, and the applause, clap, 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 and she's moving at a brisk rate to get to the podium before the applause stops. And she comes up the stairs, and she's coming toward the podium, and you could see a little light bulb go off like above her head, because she realizes that as she's making her way to the podium, she's still clutching her handbag. This is a Queen Elizabeth. The budget is in the handbag, as well as possibly a tank and, several clowns. And, Antonia, being all flustered, probably has some knitting and, who knows what. She's gotten off the plane, and there's aspirin and Epsom salts, who knows. And she realizes she's carrying, as well as her book, she's carrying this is a big, it's shiny, and it's by this big handbag. And right about where this box is, she stops and puts the handbag down and proceeds to the podium. Guess what we spent the night looking at? You could not take your eyes off the handbag. Handbag sitting there, she's talking. I have no memory of what she read. I know she read from Possession, but I could not stop looking at the goddamn handbag that's sitting there. And I'm thinking to myself, damn, that is one dramatic setup. I want to know how to get that into prose. How do you do that? That's fantastic. I don't think she meant to give us a writer's lesson that night, but the handbag took on a personality of itself. And I thought to myself, I'm going to figure out how to do this, because if I can do that in prose, I've got to, that and include Da Vinci in the first sentence. I've got something going here for, commercial readership. And if you notice, I did it in that bit that I read to you. I have called this trick designing the handbag. And as you recall from the bit that I read you think this is okay, we got a Da Vinci sketch, and then, well, we're flying in? How did we get from the Da Vinci sketch to flying in, and who the hell are these Indians? What are the Indians doing there? I thought this was going to be something about Da Vinci. And I learned how to do this. Like, you start as Antonia Byatt running toward the podium, and then you just design the handbag. You drop it in, and you completely change you take it off in a different direction, so that the reader is happily going along and never sort of sees that shift is made. And writers are doing this all the time. I think Rick Bass referred to this the other day on our panel, that we ought to be licensed. We ought to have to wear a collar that says, beware, writer at work, because this kind of ceaseless observation is always going on. And I'm always working some idea from another art form and wondering, how can I steal that? How can I make that work in prose? And I'll be standing in front of a Cézanne and I'll see that he's laid down one brushstroke of like a brilliant orange, and then right next to it, another brushstroke of this vibrant lilac. And when you're looking at it, the optical illusion between these contingent brushstrokes creates this vibrant little skeletal slash of green, because the eye does that kind of magic. And then I think to myself, how can I do that? How can I do that in prose? How can I put one kind of sound or idea up next to another sound or idea and create a third explosion? How can I change the key as the way Beethoven does? When you think the harmonic is going to go in one direction, how can I suddenly have it go to a tonic? How can I do that? How can I do that in language? And so there's this kind of excitement going on all the time that people say to me, where do you get your ideas? Well, you get them from other art forms or from designing the handbag. You just get them from keen observations. And so when Kim rang and got in touch with me, Kim Anderson got in touch with me and said, would you come to Missoula? And I said, absolutely, yes. I've been to Montana long, long time ago. Jump at the opportunity. And she said, well, all right, you go ahead and make your own plane reservations and let us know. And I knew at that moment that was not my comfort zone. And I was here last night with when David was performing. And I think David Sedaris, as much as he complains about being on planes, loves it. He gets his material. And you saw, for those of you who were in the audience last night, did you notice how he kept pulling his notebook out of his little pocket? And he read from his diaries. And even his diaries are sort of rehearsing shtick material. You could tell that he wasn't keeping a diary about, today I loved Hugh so much. It was not about his personal interior life. It was writerly stuff, writerly tricks. What am I seeing? How can I move this daily observation to something that I can subsequently use? Which makes us kind of sad and dangerous, I suppose. But I knew when Kim Anderson asked me, would you come to Missoula? I have a different temperament than David Sedaris. I completely get why he complains about being on airplanes, but he writes brilliant stuff about being on airplanes. That's not my comfort zone. I am not comfortable in it's not my material. And I knew that I had to I had to fly in my imagination, but certainly not on Southwest. And so I determined that I would drive here. So I set out 4 days ago now, 5 days ago, I suppose, through this magnificent landscape, looking for writer's tricks, looking for stuff that that's going to feed my imagination, that's going to fuel it up, that's going to get all those engines, those little spark plugs firing in my brain. And came up spent the first night in St. George and let us not spend too much time talking about Utah. And then went to second night in Pocatello, and then on the third day, came over the Continental Divide, and you come over that divide, and that big sky is there, and you come down into Montana, and I had to pull over, because, look, this is not a toady speech, I'm not toadying up y'all, but I had to pull over and have a weep. I really just yet again made a private sort of grateful inner statement to myself that I was glad I had lived long enough to see Montana. It just is gorgeous up here. And I wrote about Montana in The Shadowcatcher. But I made a deal this afternoon with Sherry Newman from Montana Public Radio that if I read it on the radio, I would not read it tonight. And I've got to honor that deal. She feels, I don't know, I guess, if you have Campbell's soup once, you don't want it twice. I don't know what the philosophy behind that was. But there is a very interesting anecdote about my coming to Montana for the first time as a sort of introduction to what the West is like, and having a sort of transcendental, and I use the word transcendental not lightly, because I think very much of the Western experience goes back to the transcendentalist, to Emerson. I blame him a lot for the myths that we have out here, and certainly to Thoreau. But I will tell you an anecdote about that trip, the first trip that I made to Montana 20 years ago. And I had it in mind even then to write a novel about the American Indian experience. And I put it in my mind that I was going to visit Pine Ridge. And I was living in London, and I had a reading in, of all places, Regina, Saskatchewan. And so I had flown from London to Regina, and thought, okay, I'm over here. So it's a direct south route from Regina, Saskatchewan to Pine Ridge. I can do this in 3 days or 4 days. And I had never seen Montana. I had never seen the Dakotas. I had never seen an American Indian. And so I got in the car, and the anecdote is in The Shadow Catcher, but one of the things that happened was that I, of course, before getting to Pine Ridge, I ended up in the Badlands. What the hell is that? When the first time that you see it, your mind turns into that kind of, you think, what am I looking at? Am I underwater? How did this happen? I had never studied geology. I just was transported to some other place. And I was staying in, for those of you who have visited Pine Ridge, I was staying in that metropolis of massive sophistication called Wall. And it's as if the Dakotans said, well, there are the Rockies. Why don't we call the town Wall? And Wall Drug, you must all have seen billboards for Wall Drug. And there I found, of course, John McPhee, thank God, who could explain basin and range and geology, and I spent the night just reading all about geology and learn. You have to know what you're looking at, and I had no clue what I was looking at. So at Wall Drug, I bought my geologist hammer, which comes with its own warning, wear safety goggles on the handle, just in case. And I also want to point out that it comes in its own flannel handbag, designed specifically for rock hounding. So I talked to the park ranger and said, I'm turned into a rock hounder overnight. And where can I go? Because rose quartzes apparently are just laying about as if John D. Rockefeller came and scattered them, over. And she gave me a map and set me out on the Pine Ridge Reservation. She gave me a map which was broken into square mile grids. And she said, you go 9 grids down this dirt road, and you get out and walk 500 yards, and there will be rose quartzes everywhere. You won't even need your hammer. You can just pick them up. So I drove out. I was on Pine Ridge all by myself in my car rented from Regina. And I stopped on the 9th grid where the odometer said to stop, and I walked out 500 yards, with my hammer, I'm looking for rose quartzes, and I'm here having my Western experience, and I'm on my first Indian reservation, and I didn't have a clue where I was. And I looked down, and there were no rose quartzes. There was nothing. There absolutely nothing there but mud. And in the middle of the mud, there was a bear claw about the size of my head, footprint. And so I immediately ran back to my car with my hammer and its flannel handbag, and got in my car and when I was taught to drive, I was always taught to check your rear view first. And as I checked my rear view, there was behind me a honkin' huge, mud-splattered Dodge Ram with two honkin' huge male Sioux Indians in the front seat, over which were 4 honkin' huge rifles on a gun rack. And that was my first experience meeting an American Indian out in the middle of nowhere with nothing but my hammer. So normally in London, I would go, go around. Dudes, there's space. Go. And then that little monkey that I always have as an editor on my shoulder said, I really don't think you want to be using representative Anglo hand signals on a Sioux reservation as your main means of communication. So I started to drive forward, and they just followed me. And you will recall in the bit that I read to you that the last sentence of that was, and I feel safe. And I do want to talk about feeling safe in America, but at that moment, I didn't feel particularly safe. I felt a little cautious because I had my hammer, but they had a gun rack. And I was a white woman, and they were 2 Sioux, and I had never met Western guys before. And I proceeded down the dirt road, and they tailed me very close, all the way down the dirt road, kept going and going and going down the goddamn dirt road. Where the hell is the road I'm supposed to be in? And a light bulb went off that I had taken from the park ranger, a grid that was mapped out in square mile squares. And I was driving a car I had rented in Regina whose odometer was in kilometers, which is why I'm not a good camper. And from that experience 20 years ago, we hit the macadam, we hit the paved road, and the guys were just following. We hit the paved road, I pull over, and the driver has his hand on the steering wheel, he just goes, minimalist cliche, but the minimalist, he just wanted to make sure I got on the paved road, he was good, he was my guardian, there was nothing to be scared of. There was just a whole cultural misunderstanding on my part, or an unnecessary fear at that moment. And I used that, another writer's trick. I just went on with my life, 20 years went by, and I was writing The Shadowcatcher. And the female fictive wife of Edward S. Curtis, who's sort of the lead character in The Shadowcatcher, is a woman called Clara, who doesn't like American Indians. She doesn't understand them. She doesn't understand their silence. She doesn't understand their presence, and she's a bit frightened of them, quite frankly. And so there's a scene in the book where Edward always had Indians kind of hanging around in Seattle. He would pay them to pose for him, and then they would come and do odd jobs. And there's these 2 Indians that are always hanging around outside in the yard on their house in Puget Sound, and they keep bringing squirrels to her for food, and she doesn't want to clean the squirrels. She wants deer or something, substantial. And so she draws a picture of a squirrel to communicate with them that she doesn't want them to bring squirrels anymore. She draws a picture of the squirrel and then strikes a line through it, as if to say, no more squirrels. And they construe this as picture of squirrel, line through squirrel, kill squirrel, deal. So that miscommunication of fear, etc. I drew on my emotional experience from that day on Pine Ridge 20 years later to write a scene in the Shadowcatcher. So another trick is store things in the handbag that you design to use, and nothing is lost. I do want to talk about why I think Dan Brown is popular. And that is because the whole idea of safety in our culture now is, we turn on the television and it's fear, 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 fear of everything. And what Brown exploits is the fear of things that are insubstantial. Why should we be afraid of the Masons? Why should we be afraid of the Illuminati? What he does is he finds a hook into a national fear, and he transmutes it. He takes it over here. So it makes us feel better, rather than, being afraid of what we really should be afraid of, which is a nuclear dirty bomb in, may I say, a designer handbag that's, could blow us all to kingdom come. And Dan Brown's books are feel-good books, and they make us feel safe because the hero always solves the mystery and he always solves the crime. When I write and I feel safe, what I'm attempting to communicate is that, that safety means a peace of mind. And for me, the reason that I like working in historical fiction is connecting with the past allows me, sort of some transcendental connection with a higher life. And the last scene of The Shadowcatcher takes place in a cemetery, where the character named Marianne Wiggins goes to visit Edward S. Curtis's real grave. And I write, if this were Hollywood, there would be a whistle rising in the distance now, moving slowly toward me, the inimitable sound of a train, a sound my nation makes. But instead, there is the stubborn, uninterrupted susurration of lives stirring from their shadows toward sustaining light. So it ends on this idea of being in touch with the past as a way of being safe. And sometimes with my students, we play the game of what would Leonardo be doing if he were alive today? And every year they say he'd be writing South Park. I don't particularly agree. At the time that he was alive, the novel, as we have come to know it through Defoe and Cervantes, hadn't been invented, so sometimes I like to believe that he would, of course, be inventing the novel. But I think all of us know that if Leonardo da Vinci were alive today, he'd be designing handbags. Thank you.
His is the voice we love hearing on the other end of the line, sometimes graciously agreeing to a reporter's request for an interview, sometimes interviewing a reporter about some local scofflaw who made it into the newspaper that day, or maybe some low-level mobster who's landed in town looking to cause trouble. Always, though, a call from Jim Burke is welcome news in the newsroom. He's the poet and landscape painter disguised as a mystery writer. He's the writer obsessed with writing. 7 days a week, he told me once, from Canty to Canty, like picking cotton. He's the Mystery Writers of America 2009 Grand Master, who knows all too well that success is the most arbitrary and fickle of companions. He is, after all, the same James Lee Burke who suffered through 111 rejections over 9 long years before a college press agreed to print The Lost Get Back Boogie. They dug up corpses to reject it, he says. Maybe so, but those corpses quickly turned over in their graves as Burke's tale of a Louisiana convict who winds up working on a Montana ranch was immediately nominated for a Pulitzer Prize. Next came The Neon Rain, which introduced readers to Dave Robichaux, the fictional Cajun cop who wrestles with both his own demons and the Louisiana underworld. More than 20 years later, Robichaux still prowls the streets of New Orleans and the back roads of Gulf bayous from New Iberia, where in real life, Burke and his wife Pearl live part of each year. The Burkes moved to Missoula, where he taught at the University of Montana for a while, 20-some years ago, then to Lolo several years back after they bought acreage outside of town. Burke's novels have added class to a genre known for its hard-boiled roots. The Faulkner of crime fiction, the reviewers say. After 2007's The Tin Roof Blowdown, wherein Robichaux sets about solving a mystery in the wake of Hurricane Katrina, the Los Angeles Times referred to Burke's, quote, almost hypnotic style, filled with poetic description, street wisdom, the occasional hard-boiled flourish, and a sort of woozy neo-existentialism. His third novel in the Robichaux series, which now totals 17 books, was Black Cherry Blues, and that tale brought Dave Robichaux to Montana and won Burke the first of 2 Edgar Awards. While Robichaux is the main character in more than half his books, Burke has not limited himself to that series. He's also the creator of several characteristically flawed West Texas lawmen, Billy Bob Holland and his cousin, Sheriff Hackberry Holland. The protagonist of Burke's 30th book, Rain Gods, released this past July. If you haven't read Rain Gods yet, I'll just tell you this much about it. It's in West Texas, it's hot and dusty and kind of creepy. There's a mass murder to start things off, a cave full of rattlesnakes, a serial killer who believes he's the avenging hand of God, a sheriff with a checkered reputation, a damaged young Iraq war veteran and his gospel-singing girlfriend running for their lives, and a big whole bunch of small-time gangsters, long on meanness and way short on smarts. I'll leave the storytelling, though, to the master, that ever-gracious voice on the other end of the line, that ever-so-humble writer of bestseller after bestseller. Please help me in welcoming our own Grand Master of Mystery, James Lee Burke.
Hi, thank you for that very nice reception. And thank you, Sherry, for the kind introduction. It's a great honor to be here once again. This short story that I'm going to read needs just only a couple of footnotes. Its title is The Big Midnight Special. The title comes from the signature song of a famous American folk singer, Hughie Ledbetter, whose nickname was Leadbelly. And he used to play a big 12-string guitar when he was an inmate at Angola Penitentiary, the Louisiana State Pen. And this story was originally published in Shenandoah Magazine. Big Midnight Special. You know how summertime is down south. It comes to you in the smell of watermelons and distant rain and the smell of cotton poison and schools of catfish that have gotten dammed up in a pond that's about to be drained. It comes to you in a lick of wet light on razor wire at sunup. You try to hold on to the coolness of the night, but by noon, you'll be standing inside your own shadow, hoeing out long rows of soybeans, a gun bull on horseback, gazing at you from behind his shades in the turnaround, his silhouette a black cutout against the sun. At night, way down inside my sleep, I dream of a white horse running in a field under a sky full of thunderheads. The tattoos wrapped around my forearms like blue flags aren't there for ornamentation. That big white horse pounding across the field makes a sound just like a heart pumping, one that's about to burst. In the camp, the cleanup details work till noon, then the rest of the weekend is free. The electric chair is in that flat-topped off-white building down by the river. It's called the Red Hat House because during the 1930s, troublemakers who were put on the levee gang and forced to wear stripes and straw hats painted red got thrown in there at night, most of them still stinking from a 10-hour day, pushing wheelbarrows loaded with dirt and broken bricks, double time under a boiling sun. The boys who stacked their time on the Red Hat gang went out Christians. That is, if they went out at all, because a bunch of them are still under the levee. The 2 iron sweat boxes set in concrete on Camp A were bulldozed out about 10 years ago, around 1953. I knew a guy who spent 22 days inside one of them, standing up in the middle of summer, his knees and tailbone jammed up against the sides whenever he collapsed. They say his body was molded to the box when the prison doctor made the hacks take him out. Leadbelly was in Camp A. That's where prison legend says he busted that big Stella 12-string over a guy's head. But I never believed that story. Not many people here understood Leadbelly, and some of them made up stories about him that would make him understandable, like them, predictable and uncomfortable with their secret knowledge about themselves when they looked in the mirror. Wiley Boone walks out of the haze on the yard, his skin running with sweat, his shirt wadded up and hanging out of his back pocket, the weight sets and high fence and silvery rolls of razor wire at his back. He has a perfect body, hard all over, his chest flat-plated, his green pinstripe breeches hanging so low they expose his pubic hair. "You still trying to pick the wild side of life?" he asks. "Working on it," I say. "It's only taken you, 10 goddamn years?" "More like 12, I say, smiling up at him from the steps to my dorm, resting my big belly J50 Gibson across my thigh. "Jody wants to match the 2 of us in the 3-rounders up in the block," he says. I lean sideways so I can see past Wiley to the group out by the weight sets. There's only one chair on the yard, and Jody Prejean is sitting in it, cleaning his nails with a toothpick, blowing the detritus off the tips of his fingers. Jody has the natural good looks of an attractive woman, but should not be confused with one. I mean, he's no queer himself. Actually, he has the lean face and deep-set dark eyes of a poet or a visionary or a man who can read your thoughts. Jody is a man of all seasons. "Tell Jody I'm too old. Tell him I'm on my 3rd jolt. Tell him I didn't come back here to take dives or beat up on tomato cans," I say. All this with a smile on my face, squinting up at Wiley against the glare. "You calling me a tomato can?" "A bleeder is a bleeder. Don't take it personal," I say. "I had over 50 stitches put in my eyebrows. That's how come my eyes look like a Chinaman's." "I'll do you a favor, Arlen," he says. "I'll tell Jody you'll be over to talk with them. I'll tell him you weren't a smartass. I'll tell him you appreciate somebody looking out for your interests." I form an E chord at the top of the Gibson's neck and start back in on the wild side of life, running the opening notes up the treble strings. When I look back up, Wiley is still standing there. There are a series of dates tattooed along each of his lats. No one knows what they represent. Wiley is doing back-to-back nickels for assault and battery and breaking and entering. "Jimmy Heap cut the original song," I say. "Nobody knows that. Most people only know the Hank Thompson version." Wiley stares down at me, his hands opening and closing by his sides, unsure if he's being insulted again. "Version of what?" "The wild side of life, you moron," I think, but I keep my silence. Saying my thoughts out loud is a disease I've got, and no amount of grief or 12-step meetings seems to cure it. "Wiley, what?" he says. "Chugging pud for Jody will either put you on the stroll or in a grave at Point Lookout. Jody goes through his own crew like potato chips. Ask for a lockup if you got to. Just get away from him." "One of the colored boys ladling peas owes me a big favor," Wiley says. Don't be surprised if you get something extra in your food tonight. He walks back to the weight sets, pulling his shirt loose from his back pocket, popping the dust and sweat off his back with it. There's already a swish to his hips, double nickels or not. The boys with serious problems are called big stripes. They stay up in the block in 23-hour lockdown, along with the snitches who are in there for their own protection. Jody Prejean doesn't qualify as a big stripe. He's intelligent and has the manners of a dapper businessman, the kind of guy who runs a beer distributorship or a vending machine company. His clothes are pressed by his favorite punk. Another punk shampoos and clips his hair once a week. His cowboy boots get picked up at his bunk every night. Before sunup, they're back under his bunk, their tips spit-shined into mirrors. His 2-deck bunk is in a board plank alcove down by the cage wire that separates us from the night screw who reads paperback westerns at a table under a naked light bulb until sunup. On the wall above Jody's bunk is a hand-brocaded tapestry that reads, "Every knee to me shall bend." I lean against Jody's door jamb and look at nothing in particular. Jody is sitting on the edge of his bunk playing chess with a stack of bread dough from Shreveport named Butterbean Simmons. Butterbean talks with a lisp and is always powdered with sunburn. He has spent most of his life in children's shelters and reformatories. When he was 19, his grandmother tried to whip him with a switch. Butterbean threw a refrigerator on top of her, then tossed her and the refrigerator down a staircase. It takes Jody a long time to look up from his game. His dark hair is sun-bleached on the tips and wet-combed on his neck. His cheeks are slightly sunken. His skin is pale as a consumptive's. "Want something, Arlen?" he says. "How do you survive in jail? You don't show fear, but you don't ever pretend you're something you're not." "I do my own time, Jody. I don't spit in anybody's soup," I say. "Know what Arlen is talking about?" Jody asks Butterbean. Butterbean grins good-naturedly, his eyes disappearing into slits. "I think so," he replies. "So tell me," Jody says. "I ain't sure," Butterbean says. Jody laughs under his breath, his eyes on me like only he and I are on the same intellectual plane. "Sit down, here, next to me, Arlen. Come on, I won't hurt you. You were a club fighter. You'll add a lot of class to the card." "No thanks," I say. "I can sweeten the pot. A touch of China White, maybe. I can make it happen." "I'm staying clean this time," I say. "We're all pulling for you on that. Where's your guitar?" "In the cage." "A Gibson, that's one of them good ones, isn't it?" "Don't mess with me, Jody. Wouldn't dream of it. Your move, Butterbean," he says. "I butcher chickens and livestock with a colored half-trustee by the name of Hogman. He has bristles on his head instead of hair and eyes like lumps of coal. They contain neither heat nor joy and have the lifeless quality of fuel that's been used up in a fire. His forearms are scrolled with scars like flattened gray worms from old knife beefs. He owns a mariachi 12-string guitar and wraps banjo strings on the treble pegs because he say they give his music shine. Some days he works in the kitchen and delivers rice and red beans and water cans to the crews in the fields. While we're chopping up meat on a big wood block that provides the only color inside the gloom where we work, he sings a song he wrote on the backs of his eyelids when he was still a young stiff and did 3 days in the sweat box for sassing a hack. "My bayou Canty woman run off with a downtown man. She left my heart in a paper bag at the bottom of our garbage can. But I ain't grieving 'cause she headed down the road. I just don't understand why she had to take my V8 Ford. You're a jewel, Hog Man, I say. A lot of women's tell me that, he replies. Was you really at Guadalcanal? Yeah, I was 16. I was at Iwo in 45, I reply. You got wounded in the war? Not a scratch, I say. Then how come you put junk in your arm, Arlen? It's medicine, no different than people going to a drugstore. I try to hold my eyes on his, but I can't do it. Like many lifers, Hogman enjoys a strange kind of freedom. He's already lost everything he ever had, so no one has power over him. That means he doesn't have to be polite when somebody tries to jerk his crank and sell the kind of doodah in here that passes for philosophy. You were struck by lightning, though. That's how you got that white streak in your hair and the quiver in your voice, he says. That's what my folks said, I say. I don't remember much of it. I was playing baseball with spikes on, and the grass was wet from the rain. Everything lit up. Then I was on the ground, and my spikes were blown off my feet, and my socks were smoking. Know what you are, Arlen? A purist. That's another word for hardhead. You think you can go your own way, wrap yourself in your own space, listen to your own riffs. Jody Prejean has got your name on the corkboard for the tree rounders. Run that by me again. Jody put your name up there on the fight card. You're going up against Wiley Boone. You can't tell a man like Jody to kiss your ass and just walk away. Jody is a gas bag, I say, feeling the words clot in my windpipe. He'll break your thumbs. He'll get somebody to pour Drano down your throat. You can ask for segregation up in the block, but he's got two guys over there can race by your cell and light you up. Jody can walk through walls. So screw him, I say. See, that make you be a purist, playing the same songs over and over again. You got your own church, and you the only cat in it. The world ain't got no place for people like you, Arlen. Not even in here. Your kind's out yonder, under the levee, their mouths stopped with dirt. Hogman slams his cleaver down on a slab of pig meat, cracking through bone and sinew, covering us both with the viscous pink mist. For supper that evening, we had rice and greens and fried fish. The warden's wife is a Christian woman and teaches Bible lessons up in the block and oversees the kitchens throughout the prison farm. Sometimes through my window, I see her walking on the levee with other women. Their dresses are like gossamer, and the shapes of their bodies are backlit against a red sun. The grass on the levee is deep green and ankle high, and the wind blowing off the Mississippi channels through it at sunset. The sky is piled with yellow and purple clouds, like great curds of smoke rising from a chemical fire. Far across the water are flooded gum and willow trees, bending in the wind, small waves capping against their trunks, marking the place where the world of free people begins. The ladies sometimes clasp hands and study the sunset. I suspect they're praying or performing a benediction of some kind. I wonder if in their innocence they ever think of the rib cages and skulls buried beneath their feet. My J50 Gibson has a mahogany back and sides and a spruce soundboard. The bass notes rumble through the soundboard like apples tumbling down a chute, and at the same time you can hear every touch of the plectrum on the treble strings. The older the J50 gets, the deeper its resonance. Floyd Tillman signed my soundboard in a Beaumont beer joint. Brownie McGee and Furry Lewis and Ike Turner signed it in Memphis. Texas Ruby and Curly Fox signed it at Cook's Hoedown in Houston. Leon McCullough signed it under the stars at an outdoor dance on the Indian reservation in the Winding Stair Mountains of East Oklahoma. My only problem is it takes me 10 years minimum to get a piece down right. I started working on Hank Snow's I'm Moving On in 1950. 11 years later, I saw him play. Know how he created that special sound and rhythm that nobody can imitate? His rhythm guitarist used conventional tuning and stayed in C sharp. But Hank tuned his strings way down, then put a capo on the first fret and did all his runs in D sharp. Is that weird or what? What the rest of the band was playing in was beyond me. The point is, Hank broke all the rules, and like the guy who wrote The Wild Side of Life, he created one of the greatest country songs ever written. My bunk is military tuck. My snacks are scarf, and my cigarette papers, and my can of Bugler tobacco, and my cigarette rolling machine, and my magazines are all squared away on my shelf. The big window fan at the end of the building keeps our dorm cool until morning. After a shower and supper and a change into clean state blues, I like to sit on my bunk and play my Gibson. Nobody bothers me, except maybe to ask for a particular song. If you're a solid con, nobody usually bothers your stuff. But a musical instrument in here can be a temptation. Just before lights go out at 9 o'clock, I always give my Gibson to the night screw, who locks it in the cage with him, along with the soda pop and candy bars and potato chips and Fritos for the canteen. Tonight is different. Can't do it no more, Arlen, he says. He has a narrow face and sun-browned arms that are pocked with cancerous skin tissue. One of his eyes is slightly lower than the other, which makes you think you're looking at separate people. That kind of jams me up, boss, I say. It ain't coincidence you're down on the bitch, boy. If you follow a few rules, maybe that wouldn't be the case. Don't do this to me, Cap. Don't degrade yourself. You're con-wise and a smart man, Arlen. Adjust. That's the key. You hearing me on this? Yes, sir. Jody got to you, you lying bastard, a voice inside me says. What you say? Not a thing, boss, I reply, lowering my eyes, folding my arms across my chest. By the way, Arlen, you're not working in the slaughterhouse no more. At bell count tomorrow morning, you're on the truck. At sunrise, I wrap my Gibson in a blanket, fold down the ends along the back and the soundboard, and tie twine around the nut, the base of the neck, and across the sound hole. I put my Gibson under my bunk and look at it for a long time, then go in for breakfast. We have grits, sausage, white bread, and black coffee, but it's hard for me to eat. Just before bell count on the yard, I look at my Gibson one more time. The morning is already hot, the wind down, clouds of gnats and mosquitoes rising from the willow trees along the river. 3 U.S. Army surplus trucks clang across a cattle guard and turn into the yard. In the distance, I can see the mounted gun bulls in the corn and soybean and sweet potato fields waiting on our arrival, the water cans set in the shadows of the gum trees, the sun coming up hard like a molten ball lifted with tongs from a furnace. Some of the gun bulls are actually trustee inmates. They have to serve the time of any guy who escapes while under their charge. At noon, I see Butterbean Simmons hoeing in the road next to me, eyeballing me sideways, his long-sleeved shirt buttoned at the wrist and throat, his armpits looped with sweat. The money is on Wiley in the 3-rounder, he says. I'm betting on you, though. You'll rip him up. The soil is loamy, cinnamon-colored, and smells of pesticide and night damp. Tell Jody he touches my box, we take everything to a higher level, I reply, my hoe rising and falling in front of me, notching weeds out of the row. Man, I'm trying to be your friend, Arlen. My oldest enemy is my anger. It seems to have no origins and blooms in my chest and sends a rush of bile into my throat. Lose the guys, Bean, and while you're at it, get the fuck away from me. The night screw had said I was down on the bitch, as in habitual, as in 3 jolts in the same state. When you carry the bitch with you into a parole hearing, there's a good chance you're not even going out max time. There's a good chance you're going to stack eternity in the inmate cemetery at Point Lookout. Why am I working on my 3rd jolt? I'd like to say it's skag, but my dreams aren't just about white horses pounding across a field under a blue-black sky forked with lightning. My dreams tell me about the other people who live inside my skin, people who have done things that don't seem connected to the man I think I am. By quitting time, I'm wired to the eyes. After we offload from the trucks, everyone burst into the dorm, kicking off work shoes, stripping off their clothes, heading for the shower with towels and bars of soap. I head for my bunk. My Gibson is still there, but not under it, on it, like a wrapped mummy stretched out on the sheet. I put it back under my bunk, undress, and go into the shower. Wiley Boone stands under one of the pipes, a stream of cold water dividing on his scalp, his body running with soap, braiding in a stream off his phallus. "Who moved my box, Wiley?" I ask. "Guys cleaning up, the count screw," he replies. "Maybe it was an earthquake." "Yeah, that's probably it." "You're planning to lay down in the 3-rounder, aren't you?" I say. "I'm going to hand you your ass is what I'm going to do," he says. "Wrong. I'm going to hold you up, Wiley, and while I'm holding you up, I'm going to cut you to pieces. Then I'm going to foul you in the balls so hard your eyes are going to pop out. So you're going to lose every way possible, Wiley. When you figure all that out, go tell it to Jody." "You got swastika tats on your arms, Arlen. Hope nobody wants their ink back. You ever have to give your ink back? Thinking about it makes my pecker shrivel up." The night screw said I was con-wise and smart. After trying to bluff Jody by going at him through Wiley, I had to conclude that the IQ standards in here are pretty low. But I'd screwed up. When you're inside, you never let other people know what you're thinking. You don't argue, you don't contend, you don't let your body language show you're on to the other guy's schemes. You wrap yourself in a tight ball and do your time. I'd been a club fighter. Our owner took us from town to town and told us when to stand up and when to lie down. That's how it works, no different than professional wrestling. I'd shot off my mouth to Wiley and tipped him to what I'd do if Jody tries to make me fight by stealing my guitar. That was dumb. Just before lights out, I go into Jody's alcove. He's wearing pajamas instead of skivvies, eating a bowl of blackberry pie and cream with a spoon. "You won't have any trouble with me," I say. "I'll be on the card and I'll make it come out any way you want." My eyes seem to go in and out of focus when I hear my words outside of myself. "I'll give it some thought," Jody says. "A man disrespects me, he puts me in an embarrassing position. Even guys I admire, guys such as yourself." "Yeah," I say. "Wish you hadn't created this problem for us, Arlen. You told Wiley I was going to put him on the stroll. Why'd you do that?" "What do you want from me, Jody?" He glances up at the tapestry on the wall, the one that says, every knee to me shall bend. Tuesday, the sun is a yellow flame inside the bright sheen of humidity that glistens on the fields and trees. The gun bulls try to find shade for themselves and their horses under the water oaks, but there is precious little of it when the sun climbs straight up in the sky. The air is breathless, and blowflies and gnats torment their horses' eyes and legs. A white guy named Toad, because of the moles on his face, collapses at the end of my row and lies in a heap between the soybean plants. It's the second time he has fallen out. A gun bull tells 3 colored guys to pick Toad up and lay him on a red ant hill out in the gum trees. Toad is either a good actor or he's had sunstroke, because he lies there 5 minutes before the captain tells the colored guys to put him in the back of the truck. I hear Butterbean thudding his hoe in the row next to me, his breath wheezing in his chest, sweat dripping off the end of his nose. He wears a straw hat with the brim slanted downward to create shade on his face and neck. "I didn't have nothing to do with it, Arlen," he says. "With what?" I say. "It." Then I know the price I'm going to pay for going up against Jody. In my mind's eye, I see a trustee from the kitchen walking through the unlocked door of the night screw's cage, the dorm empty, his flat-soled, copper eyelet prison work shoes echoing down the 2 rows of bunk beds. I feel the sun boring through the top of my head, my ears filling with the sound of wind inside a conch shell, my lips forming an unspoken word like a wet bubble on my lips. I feel the hoe handle slip from my palms as though the force of gravity has suddenly become stronger than my hands. I hear the creak of leather behind me, a mounted hack straightening himself in the saddle, pushing himself up in the stirrups. "You gonna fall out on me, Arlen?" he says. "No, sir, boss." "Then what the hell is wrong with you?" "Gotta go to the dorm." "You sick?" "Gotta protect my box, boss." "Pick up your tool, boy. Don't hurt yourself worse than you already have." When I drop off the back of the truck that evening, I watch everyone else rush inside for showers and supper. I walk up the wood steps into the building and cross through the night screw's cage, wiping the sweat and dirt off my chest with my balled-up shirt. The dorm is almost totally quiet, everybody's eyes sliding off my face as I walk toward my bunk. One guy coughs. A couple of other guys head for the showers, walking naked past me, their eyes averted, flip-flops slapping the floor. I get down on one knee and pull my guitar from under my bunk. It's still wrapped in the blanket I tied around its neck and belly, but the twine sags and the lines and shape of the blanket are no longer taut. Inside, I can hear the rattle of wood. The contours of my Gibson now feel like the broken body of a child. I untie the twine from the nut in the bottom of the neck and the belly and peel back the folds of the blanket. The mahogany back and sides and the spruce soundboard have been splintered into kindling. The bridge has been torn loose from the soundboard, and the strings are coiled up on themselves and look like a rat's nest. The neck is broken. The exposed wood, framed by the dark exterior finish, makes me think of bone that has turned yellow inside the earth. I sit on the side of my bunk and take my bugler tobacco can and my cigarette papers and my rolling machine off my shelf and start building a cigarette. No one in the dorm speaks. Gradually they file into the shower, some of them looking back at me, the night screw watching them, then shifting his eyes in my direction. "Better eat up, boy," he says. "Give mine to the cat, boss," I reply. "Say that again?" "Don't pay me no mind, Cap. I ain't no trouble, I say. A few decks of Camels or Red Dots, Lucky Strikes, will buy you any kind of shank you want, a pie wedge of tin or a long shard of window glass wired and taped tightly inside a chunk of broom handle. A toothbrush heated by a cigarette lighter and reshaped around a razor blade, a sharpened nail or the guts of a ballpoint pen mounted on a shoe polish applicator. Cell house shakedowns probably don't discover a third of the inventory. Molotov cocktails are a different matter. The ingredients are harder to get, and gasoline smells like gasoline, no matter where you hide it. But a guy up in the block who works in the heavy equipment shed knows how to stash his product where his customer can find it and the hacks can't. It's a package deal, and his product never fails. A mason jar of gas, Tide detergent, and paraffin shaved into crumbs on a carrot grater. He even tapes a cotton ignition pad on the cap, so all you have to do is wet it down, touch a flame to it, and heave it at your target. There's no way to get the detergent and the hot paraffin off your skin. I don't like to think about it. Ever hear the sound of somebody who's caught inside a flamethrower? It's just like a mewing kittens. They don't scream, they just mew inside the heat. You hear it for a long time in your sleep. You hear it sometimes when you're awake, too. Jody comes to my bunk after supper. Some of his crew trail in after him, lighting smokes, staring around the dorm like they're not part of the conversation, but lapping it up like dogs licking a blood spore. You're starting to get a little rank, Arlen. You're not going to take a shower? Jody says. I'll get to it directly, maybe in the next few days, I reply. Some of the guys think you ought to do it now. I think you're probably right. Thanks for bringing it to my attention, I say. I stub out my cigarette in my butt can and blow the smoke straight out in front of me, not looking at him. The pieces of my destroyed Gibson folded next to me inside my blanket. I pull the corners of the blanket together and tie them in a knot, creating a large sack. I can hear the strings and the broken wood clatter together when I lift the sack and slide it under my bunk. My box is still with me, Jody, I say. So is the music of all the people who signed their names on it. Busting it up doesn't change anything. You're as piss poor at lying as you are playing the guitar, Arlen. I was at EWO, I say, grinning up at him. So what? He says. Truth is, I don't rightly know myself. I strip naked in front of Jody and his crew and watch them step back from my stink. Then I walk into the shower, turn on the cold water full blast, and lean my forehead against the cinder blocks, my eyes tightly shut. Weasel Combs is a runner and jigger, or lookout man, for a guy up in the block who takes grapevine orders and provides free home delivery. Our crew is working in a soybean field up by the front of the farm, not far from the main gate in the adjacent compound where the free people live. At noon, the flatbed truck from the kitchen arrives, and Hogman and Weasel drop off the bed onto the ground and uncap the stainless steel cauldron that contains our red beans and rice. A dented water can full of Kool-Aid sits next to it. Weasel is an alcoholic check writer who always has a startled look on his face, like somebody just slammed a door on his head. How about an extra piece of cornbread, Arlen? He says. I wouldn't mind, I say. I got that magazine you wanted. It's in the cab. I'll bring it to you when I get finished here. His eyes stare brightly into mine. His denim shirt is unbuttoned all the way down his chest. His ribs are stenciled against his skin. His waist so narrow, his pants are falling off. A big square of salve-stained gauze is taped over an infected burn on his stomach. "I could use some reading material. Thanks for bringing that, Weasel," I replied. We eat in a grove of gum and persimmon trees, the sky growing black overhead. Down below the road that traverses the prison farm, I could see the clapboard, tin-roofed houses of the free people inside the fence, clothes popping on the wash lines, a colored inmate breaking corn in a wash tub for the wife of the head gun bull. Kids playing on a swing set, no different than a back-of-town, poor white neighborhood anywhere in the South. The irony is that free people do almost the same kind of time we do, marked by the farm in ways they don't recognize in themselves. The hack at the gate sits in a wicker-bottomed chair inside a square of hot shade provided by the shack where he has a desk and a telephone. He's over 70 and has been riding herd on convicts since he was a teenager. Legend has it that during the 1930s, he and his brother would get drunk on corn liquor in the middle of the afternoon, take a nap, then pick out a colored inmate and tell him to start running. People would hear a couple of shots inside the wind, and another sack of fertilizer would go into the levee. His teeth are gone and his skin is dotted with liver spots. There's not a town in Mississippi or Louisiana he can retire to, lest one of his own charges finds him and does things to him that no one does to an elderly man. I can hear thunder in the south. The wind comes up and trowels great clouds of dust out of the fields, and I feel a solitary raindrop like a sting my face. Weasel squats down in front of me, his mouth twisted like a knife wound. A copy of Sports Illustrated is rolled in his palm. "There's a real interesting article here you ought to read," he says, peeling back the pages with his thumb, "about boxing and all, and some of the shitheads who have spoiled the game." He slips a beautifully fashioned wood-handled shank out of his bandage and folds the magazine pages around it. He lowers his voice. "It's hooked on the tip. You want to hear that punk squeal, put it into his guts 3 times, then bust it off inside. He'll drown in his own blood." When the truck drives off, Hogman is looking at me from the back of the flatbed, his legs hanging in the dust, his eyes filled with the sad knowledge about the world that is of no value to him and that no one else cares to hear about. The wind keeps gusting hard all afternoon, and lightning ripples silently through the thunderheads, sometimes making a creaking sound like the sky cannot support its own weight. The air is cool and smells of fish roe and wet leaves and freshly plowed earth and swamp water so netted with algae it is seldom exposed to full light. The air smells of a tropical jungle on a Pacific island and a foxhole you chop from volcanic soil with an entrenching tool. It smells of the fecund darkness that lies under the grass and mushrooms that can bloom overnight on a freshly dug grave. Again, I feel the gravitational pull of the earth under me, and I have no doubt the voices that whisper in the grass are whispering to me. I sit on the front steps of our dorm and stare through the wire at the wide, rain-dented expanse of the Mississippi River. Inside the flooded gum trees on the far side, a bolt of lightning strikes the earth and quivers like a hot wire against the sky. I think about the day I was struck by lightning and how I woke later and discovered there was a quiver in my voice, one that made me sound like a boy who was perpetually afraid. But my voice and my deeds did not go with one another. The Japanese learned that, and so did my adversaries in New Orleans, Birmingham, Miami, Houston, and Memphis, or wherever I carried the sickness that lived inside me. A hurricane is blowing up on the Texas coast. It may be headed right up the pike, the night screw says. Why didn't you protect my box, boss? It's not right what y'all did, I say, my arms propped on my knees, my face lowered. Your problem's with Jody Prejean, boy. You best not be trying to leave it on other people's doorstep, he replies. I raise my head and grin at him. I'll never learn how to pick the wild side of life. It's not right, boss. It's got to be in the Constitution somewhere. A man has got the right to pick his guitar and play the wild side of life. His face clouds with his inability to understand what I'm saying or whether I'm mocking him or myself. Your problem is with Jody. You hearing me? Now you watch your goddamn mouth, he says. For sassing him, I should be on my way to segregation, but I'm not. Then I realize how blind and foolish I have been. That night, as the rain drums on the roof, I catch Jody in the latrine. He's wearing flip-flops and skivvies. His skin is pale as alabaster, his dark hair freshly clipped. The hacks are setting you up, I say. Really, he says, urinating into a toilet bowl without raising the seat, cupping his phallus with his entire palm. Wake up, Jody, they've made me the hitter. This is all going to play out only one way, Arlen. You're going to be my head bitch. You're going to collect the stroll money and keep the books and be available if and when I need you. You're going to be my all-purpose boy. I'll rent you out if I have a mind, or I'll keep you for my own. It will all depend on my mood. As I watch him, I think of the shank I got from Weasel, that piece of glazed ceramic honed on an emery wheel, dancing with light, the tip incised with a barb that will tear out flesh and veins when the blade is pulled from the wound. I want to plunge it into Joni's throat. Why are you looking at me like that? He says. Because you're stupid, I reply. Because you're a tool. Because you're too dumb to know you're a punch for the system. He shakes off his penis and pushes at the handle on the toilet with his thumb. He wipes his thumb on his skivvies. It's just a matter of time. Everybody gets down on his knees eventually. You didn't go to Sunday school, Arlen? The rain quits at sunrise, at least long enough for us to get into the fields. Perhaps 50 of us are strung out in the soybeans. Then the wind drops and the sky becomes sealed with a black lid from one horizon to the next. Seagulls are tormenting the air as though they have no place to land. In the distance, a tornado falls from a cloud like a giant spring and twists its way across the land. A bunch of trucks arrive, and the gun bulls herd us to the levee, and we start offloading bags of sand and dropping them along the river's edge. The river is swollen and yellow, and the willow trees along the banks make me think of a mermaid's green hair undulating inside a wave. More guys are brought up from the block, snitches and even big stripes from lockdown, and malingerers from the infirmary. Even Jody Prejean, his head punk, Wiley Boone, and Hogman and Weasel. Anybody who can heft 60-pound sacks and carry them up a 40-degree incline and stack them in a wall to stop the river from breaching the levee. I think about all the dead guys buried in the levee, and I think about the hacks who set me up to kill Jody Prejean. I think about the Japs I potted with my M1 when I was 16, some of it just for kicks. I think about what I did to a dealer in the French Quarter who tried to sell me powdered milk when I was jonesing and couldn't stop shaking long enough to heat a spoon over a candle flame. I think about what happened to a Mexican in San Antonio who tried to jackroll me from my Gibson. I remember the look in the eyes of every person I have hurt or killed, and I want to scrub my soul clean of my misspent life and to rinse the blood of my victims from my dreams. I want to pick the wild side of life the way Jimmy Heap used to do it. I drop the sandbag I'm carrying onto the levee. Where you going, Arlen? Brother Bean says. Stay off those pork chops, Bean, I reply. I walk down the levee into the shallows, my hands open to the sky. The wind is whipping through the willow trees, stripping leaves off the branches, scudding the river's surface into froth along the shoals. I feel small waves slide over my pant cuffs and the tops of my work boots. You lost your mind, boy? A gun bull hollers. I wade deeper into the river, its warmth rising through my clothes, raindrops striking my scalp and shoulders as hard as marbles. The surface of the river is dancing with yellow light, strings of Japanese hyacinths clinging to my hips, clouds of dark sediment swelling up around me. Far beyond the opposite shore, the thunderheads look like an ancient mountain piled against the sky. I hear the pop of a shotgun in the wind, and a cluster of double-aught bucks flies past me in patterns on the water. The river is high on my chest now, and my arms are straight out as I work my way deeper into the current, like a man balancing himself on a tightrope. A floating island of uprooted trees bounces off of me, cracking something in my shoulder, turning me in a circle, so for just a moment I have to look back at the prison farm. All of the inmates are on their knees or crouched down in fear of what is happening around them. I see the night screw pull a shotgun from the hands of a gun bull on horseback and come hard down the levee, digging his boots into the sod. Just as he fires, I smile at him and at the wide panorama of his fellow guards and their saddled horses and the convicts who seem to dot the levee like spectators at a ball game. In my mind's eye, the 12-gauge pumpkin ball flies from the muzzle of his gun as quickly as a bird and touches my forehead and freeze frames the levee and the people on it and the flooded willows and the river chained with rain rings and the trees of lightning bursting across the sky. One of my sleeves catches on the island of storm trash, and as I float southward with it, my eyelids stitched to my forehead, I think I see a mountain looming massive and scorched beyond the opposite shore, one I saw many years ago through a pair of binoculars when 6 of my fellow countrymen labored to plant an American flag on the peak. Thanks very much.
Aren't we lucky, lucky people to have had all this wealth these last few days? These 3 great writers are going to be out in the lobby signing their books for you all. And all I can say is buy their work. It is the best investment you can make. And finally, I want to say, once again, thank you, lovers of literature. You're what makes the festival possible for the last 10 years and on into the future. Thank you all so much.